Was it a conscious decision or a momentary lapse of reason? How did progress take priority over humankind? How could the desire for a modern way of life that threatens our future be considered a way of life? Could it be we are connected to all things in the universe, not the center of it? That suburbs in Los Angeles affect the melting ice caps of Antarctica. Deforestation in the Congo affects the typhoons of Japan. Now we must face the insurmountable challenges for what they really are. Opportunities to reinvent and redesign. E squared, the economies of being environmentally conscious.
Cities are very important because they're where most of the population in the world now lives. By 2030 onwards, probably 2/3 of humanity are going to live in cities, and half already do now. And we already consume 75% of the world's energy, and we're responsible for 80% of greenhouse gas emissions.
Therefore, a small change in the amount of energy consumed by cities and the amount of pollution that they cause, the amount of CO2 they emit, can make a massive impact on the climate change for the planet.
I love London. It's a great city. We've got wonderful architecture. Here we're in the Westminster area and we're coming back into Parliament Square and we've got the old buildings.
We were the city that actually came up with the concept of the mega industrial city, and we spread that concept throughout the world. And we now feel we have a responsibility to test drive with other cities the sustainable city.
You know, we've had traffic in London since we've had the horse and carriage. But sure, it has got worse and we've got to do something about it. But you're not going to get rid of it completely. And if you're not going to get rid of it completely, you just got to figure out ways how to get it through quicker.
It's a daunting task. 8 million people are expected to live in London by 2025. Unless more of them get out of their cars and onto public transport, gridlock will intensify, threatening the city's vitality.
Our population's going up, and our vision is not to export people outside of London or jobs outside of London, but to make London an exemplary, sustainable world city, which means that London actually has to accommodate its growing population and the new jobs in London itself. And we're doing that by vastly extending our public transport system and locating development, shops, jobs, leisure, close to good public transport.
It's a city that 8-9 years ago was declining. The public realm of the city was dirty, squalid. People didn't feel happy. People were leaving the city. But it's a city that has been able, from certain points of view, to reverse this trend.
The next station is London Bridge. Change for the Northern Line and National Rail services.
I think one really couldn't possibly overestimate the radical change London has introduced to thinking about transport in the recent years. And London was in this fortunate situation simply because of the new Labour government rethinking how urban governance should be done and joining that with very clear ideas about transportation.
For the vast majority of the public, it has no immediate relevance other than that we hope their air quality is going to get better. We have really targeted...
In 2000, Ken Livingston became the first directly elected mayor of London. A controversial figure, he wasted no time developing a comprehensive traffic plan by enacting the 2003 Congestion charge.
When we originally asked people what the problem was in central London, they said congestion. And we said, well, how are we going to solve it? And they said, more public transport. So we said, well, how are we going to pay for it then? Do you want higher fares, increase government taxes, increase local taxes? Or what about charging the people who cause the congestion to pay for it? Ha-ha, yeah, good idea. And so if we then collect the money from them and spend it on public transport, is that good? And so that sort of squared the circle, and yes, that was deemed to be good.
Well, the idea of congestion charging is a very, very old one, and it came from the 50s. And in fact, in '88, we decided that London needed congestion charging because it was already pretty gridlocked. This is central London. And in the 90s, I commissioned a whole study which was looking at congestion charging being its centrepiece, but a whole lot of other measures to do with parking and investment in buses and so on. And what happened was, of course, it was there, ready for the new mayor, and a very, very courageous mayor, Mayor Livingston, to actually implement.
First of all, that the mayor did it by completely ignoring his advisors. Studies were done which showed that it could be done, that it could just about work, but they weren't sure about the technology. His political advisor says this was going to be political suicide, you'll never be re-elected. And as any good mayor does, you've just got to have a sense. Is it the right thing to do? And he just went for it.
It was really the biggest political sort of struggle in the city. It was a very exciting moment. When it happened, it had just about 50% sort of agreement within the city, so it was just a very small majority, although the mayor was elected very clearly articulating his vision for this fee.
Business wanted it, but it was brought in the teeth of hysterical press opposition, and not most of the population wanting it. But of course that melted away once we put it in.
The initial congestion zone covered about 26 square kilometers of central London. It has since been extended to include affluent, less congested West London.
On the boundary of the congestion charging zone, there are cameras, and they read all the number plates of all the vehicles that are coming into the zone and then check them against a database. And the cameras pick up sort of over 90% of people observed. So if you're coming in sort of like a couple of days a week, you'll get caught. It works in the sense that if you drive within the central area on Monday to Friday, between the hours of 7 in the morning and 6 at night, you have to pay a flat charge, and that charge is £8. Traffic was reduced by 15% and congestion was reduced by 30%, sort of instantly. CO2 went down by, I think, 16%. Other pollutants, particulate matter, PM10s and NOx, went down between sort of like 8 and 13%, depending on which pollutant you're talking about. So there were benefits in terms of reduced vehicle emissions and reduced CO2.
When the congestion charge first came in, it was great. We were doing journeys that were taking us before congestion charge, round about 20-25 minutes. We were doing them in 10 and 15. However, people started to creep back in with their cars, and congestion, as far as we are concerned, is back to what it was before the charge.
The classic critique with congestion charge is, of course, that it didn't change anything in terms of congestion, and that's what you typically hear from people operating cabs or driving in the city on a very regular basis. And if we look scientifically at congestion's level in the city, it is true that following the initial drop of congestion again started picking up. But that had to do with indirectly related events. Most importantly, that a lot of road construction was occurring. But then also the other effect is, of course, that quite a significant amount of street space has been redistributed to the pedestrian, the bus users, the cyclists. Now, one cannot underestimate, once again, the effects on quality of life if you start really widening sidewalks, making the city really a pleasant environment for its prime users, meaning humans rather than vehicles.
The congestion charge generates £123 million a year. By law, this money must be invested in the city's public transport infrastructure. About 80% goes toward upgrading and expanding London's bus service.
Given that there is an extensive and pretty effective form of underground service, the mayor had to decide that if he were to reduce cars coming to the centre, he had to improve other forms of transport to take up that sort of difference between the two. And therefore there was a massive investment in the quality of the bus service.
The bus service is easy to change, is quick to alter and can produce some results. So putting more money into the bus service has produced a more reliable service, more of it to cater for the peaks so that people can get to work. We've renewed the vehicle fleet, which has both improved its emissions and is now completely wheelchair accessible. And actually this city has a 5% modal shift from cars to public transport, which is unique in any world city.
I think the biggest problem with traffic in London at the moment is the amount of buses that we have in the central area. Now, that's not such a bad thing, except is if you look at the buses during the day, and certainly during the evening, they're running at round about 20% capacity. So you're not getting the amount of people, although our esteemed mayor will argue that he is, but what he's done is given free travel to the school kids and counts that as the amount of people that have increased the rides on buses.
The Mayor's introduced free public transport for everybody in full-time education under 18 to encourage them to use public transport. And it also works because then they consider it a realistic option when they become adults and when they start work. Nobody's suggesting, despite some of the criticism, that we're anti-car altogether. What we don't want is people to use cars when there's a sustainable alternative. So we're putting a lot of money into walking and cycling.
The city created Transport for London to integrate all modes of transit, including foot, cycle, and river traffic, into a central body with a common transport vision.
Transport for London looks at car movement and the roads, the buses, the tube, the trains, but also at cycling and walking. And that is really unique. Most transport agencies, of course, look at either one of these areas, and it has already had very positive effects within these agencies to have people talk much more closely, that in fact all of them deliver the same thing, the same good.
So the congestion charge was one of these strategies which raised the sort of quality of life. It's not a thing in and of itself. I mean, you could talk about road taxing, congestion charges, if it's a good thing because it reduces traffic. It's part of a much more complex picture, and it's about to do with making cities livable.
Efficient transit encourages people to visit the city. Access to parks and public squares makes them want to live there too. Improving that access is the aim of the 100 Public Spaces program, started by Ken Livingston.
The Mayor's 100 Public Spaces program was a very, very simple idea to try and focus what we're trying to do. To try and say that a city as growing as fast as London should be investing in public space.
Some of the investment from the mayor, which comes in through the congestion charge, is being used to improve the quality, literally the design of the environment. So the most famous of all is Trafalgar Square, which is already difficult for me now to remember that only 6 years ago it was a racetrack.
It looks very simple now when you see it. We closed the road in front of the National Gallery, increased the flight of steps and paved it well. But actually it's a very, very subtle design Norman Foster carried out in order to create a far better square and a far better focus for that part of London.
Here we've just come round Trafalgar Square. They've pedestrianised the north side of the square, taken out one route completely, and what have we got? 15-20 minute wait on the square sometimes because of the heavy congestion.
And with the exception of one or two people who, complain about the traffic being slightly slower around there, I think if you talk to almost any Londoner or any visitor, they'd see this being a huge success, an example where relatively small investments in the city can transform it, really beyond recognition. The second project in that line is Parliament Square. Parliament Square is different, but the starting point is the same. That's to close one arm of the big traffic gyratory. Now, around Parliament Square, we have again a collection of absolutely extraordinary buildings. Whether it be Westminster Abbey, Big Ben, the Palace of Westminster. So the idea is to create a very, very simple landscape that ties those places together. And we're quite excited that the proposals which are emerging should create a quite extraordinary transformation of a traffic island into a great, great space in the centre of London.
All this is leading an initiative in many public spaces across London to not get rid of the car, but tame the presence of the car so that the pedestrian is given priority.
On busy Kensington High Street, removing the metal barriers separating pedestrians from the road traffic actually reduced congestion and car accidents.
Well, what we would have seen a couple of years ago, if we'd looked at down this area here, is a forest of signs, a wall of metal railings across the middle of the street, another wall of metal railings along each side of the street, and lots of signs telling people to stay out. It was an attempt to actually, through government control, to define where people could go. And it was unsightly. It slowed the traffic down, caused a lot of stops and starts, which creates more pollution. And you would have seen pedestrians vaulting railings, vaulting the railing in the middle, and then dashing across the street like scared rats. What we have now is a mediated space. What we have now is a space that actually forces the motorists, the pedestrians, and the bicyclists to acknowledge, respect, and come to terms with one another. What we need to do with the city in the future is recognize this idea of the street as shared space, and it really needs to be oriented around public transportation. And that's the model that we need to move forward into the urban century, which is the century that we're in this world now.
In contemporary cities, urban growth often amounts to urban sprawl. London uniquely placed limits on such expansion in the 1930s.
We have in London something called the Green Belt. It's like a circle of countryside beyond which London is not allowed to grow. All growth, all development, all new housing, all new schools, all new offices has to happen, A, within the city limits, and B, on ex-industrial land, which might have had electricity, power stations on them, or gas depots and things like that. One of these is where the Olympics is going to be.
Preparing for the 2012 Olympics could also revitalize the brownfields of East London, site of the London Games. Investment in rail alone is expected to increase transport capacity to 240,000 people an hour.
The Olympics will be held in the Valley, which lies to the east of London. The Lee River is a river system that flows from the north directly south into the River Thames, and it is a landscape of canals and industrial waterways full of large tin sheds, factories, waste processing plants, with this sort of lost waterway system running through the middle of it. And the Olympics will take place in this area, but in order to hold the Olympics we have to remove all that building form. We have to remove all of that waste. We have to recreate the flood systems and river systems, many back to their natural state, before we can actually have an environment which we can then build the Olympic facilities into. It also sits in an area which has some of the worst socioeconomic conditions in the country. So you have indices of deprivation there which put you in the bottom 5% of the country, or the worst in Europe. It is a place with several hundred languages spoken. It is a place with high unemployment, poor health, you name it. So the Olympics is an instrument, as it were, to start changing that, both physically and through job creation and that sheer buoying up of the community by having this great world event in this part of London. You're starting to sort of take that asymmetric, unbalanced London model, which is sort of up in the west and down in the east, and start to correct that. New city regeneration relies on good public transport systems. The Games relies on good public transport systems. And therefore, you've got a project here which is driven by transport both for the Games and its post-Games position. And therefore, transport and transport infrastructure became effectively the great building block of why this is where it is, and how it will operate and how it will succeed afterwards in terms of the amount of development and the types of things which will happen in that part of London.
We're going to grow by 1 million people in the next 20 years, and a huge amount of that growth is going to be in East London. The growth into East London had been slow, it's now accelerating. It's accelerating because the transport infrastructure's gone in. Stratford is developing as almost a regional centre outside central London, and the network of trams and buses is going in. So the transport infrastructure is there, and people will be transported into the Olympics on public transport.
Students now ready to depart. Please stand clear of the doors, mind the closing doors.
The opportunity to realise the benefits of the Games are absolutely huge. So, you know, when we put sewer pipes in the ground now, or fibre optic cables, they're all being located in anticipation of what's going to happen 5-10 years down the line. I always refer to the Games cost as hardly being cost, it's investment. This is the type of expenditure you'll need to lay out in order to create these large areas of city in the future.
Like the 100 Public Spaces program, the city plans to complement East London's new transit infrastructure with investment in public green space. The East London Green Grid will stitch together new and existing open space with the aim of enhancing livability beyond the city centre.
The real challenge is to come up with something as a kind of simple framework to shape the kind of growth and the kind of settlements and parts of the city we want to develop. The idea of the Green Grid is to take all sorts of small park spaces, canals, waterways, tidal basins, and try and link it together and try and actually re-landscape it, enhance it, invest in it, and then manage it. So you get a network of green spaces, you get a wonderful environmental effect, you get the biodiversity we need in London, you get pedestrian and cycle routes through that part of London. But ultimately it gives people access to green space, and it enriches the communities we want to build and to strengthen there.
If we look back in 20 years' time, what I'd like to see is a healthy, vibrant, safe, accessible, low-energy piece of London, a model of 21st century city development where the building blocks of sustainability are in place. We have happy, safe, contented people living, but that also it's seen as an example of how you do city development, and I hope other people are learning from it, and we're doing even better in the schemes we're doing in the next round.
I want to say that we've learned from a lot of other cities too, and I think cities can learn from each other. I mean, we wouldn't have done congestion charging without the example of Trondheim, which is a tiny place in Norway. So it's about practical action, it's about cutting carbon together and working on exchanges of best practice, getting ideas from each other. And I would like to look back and say we had a very small window of time to actually avoid catastrophic climate change. And we, the cities, working with all the other partners, managed it.
For more information about E Squared, visit our website at pbs.org.
E Squared Transport is available on DVD. To order, call PBS Home Video at 1-800-PLAY-PBS or visit us online at shoppbs.org.